Hi everyone, Michael here from the Buy Stuff store and BS Customs, here to demonstrate the installation of our Dell monitor mount and bezel kit. Let's get started. So here is our bezel mount kit. Includes what you see here on the table. There's the bezel, the weather stripping for sealing around the edges of the monitor, brackets, screws, washers, and the mount. So we'll start with installing the weather stripping around the frame. Kind of seals the bezel to the monitor and makes a fairly clean look. So we just peel and stick. All right, I'm gonna flip the monitor over. This one's going in horizontally, so I'm gonna put the mount on horizontally. Start with, just take the 4 screws out of the back and the mount. Some people remove all the plastic and stuff, but for this mount and for our purposes, this works quite well. So just take those screws out, and then the mount will fit on the back and align with those screws. So we've got 40 millimeter M4 socket caps to fit in there. We put 2 washers on, and the small and the fender washer. Get them started in all the holes. So then we'll just make sure that it is straight to the monitor as much as possible. It can be adjusted later, but it's much easier if you get it right the first time. And then we will snug these all up. And again, if I was mounting the monitor vertically, then I just would have put this the opposite direction so that the monitor was straight up and down. And then the cables would be coming out of the side there. Okay, we're going to install the angle brackets on the corners like so. I'm going to pre-drill the holes for these because particle board, as most of you would know, can be tricky. You have to be very careful to get good holes and not strip them out when you put screws in. So I'm going to put the brackets just back from the edge. Don't go over, because that interferes with the mount sliding into the cabinet. So just be back a little bit, and up and down doesn't matter so much, but where you drill your hole where you want it. And again, very carefully, if you're using a drill, do not over torque the screws. This one has adjustable torque on it. So you want to keep it flat to the edge and just snug in there. And we'll do the same for all the other 3 corners. Now I used a 5/64 bit, which is just enough to give me a pilot hole for these screws to dig in and bite. Okay, and we're ready for the cabinet. Okay, pause it there. All right, so here's our Street Fighter cabinet that we're installing this monitor into. You can see we've built it without the stock screen. If you're converting your existing cabinet, you need to remove that screen, which basically opposite to the instructions when you built it. So basically for all intents and purposes, it needs to be back together like this. You know, these screws don't need to be tight yet, but it needs to be snugged back up, and then I'll show you what we do to get the new bezel in. While I'm at it, I'll show you what we have. This is our vertical bezel for Space Invaders mod or something similar. So that'll fit in there. The Buck Hunter is slightly different bezel than all the other horizontal cabinets, because it actually has more of a vertical screen. So it actually ends up being about 1/2 inch or 5/8 of an inch shorter at the top. So that will not fit in a standard arcade 1-up cabinet. The Buck Hunter won't. So the one we're putting in here is for the standard horizontal Buck Hunter cabinet, or not non-Buck Hunter cabinet. So I'm going to lay this down on its side, and you can see from the front how we're going to do that. So if you haven't left the side loose, then loosen it off. Just back these screws out a little bit. Just the top 4 primarily, because you will see that this bezel, we can just fit into the groove from behind here on the bottom, and then push it in, and it'll snap into place in the groove like so. If it's a little snug fitting, we want it to fit pretty tightly. If it's a hair oversized where it doesn't seat all the way in the groove, then just sand the corner a little bit, make sure that's fitting into the groove nicely. We'll tighten these back up, and it'll hold it in place before we put the monitor. So we're going to lay it on its front after that's installed, in order to put the monitor in after that. Okay, so now you bring your monitor mount installed brackets on it. You can put your cables in ahead of time if you want. When it's horizontal, you can actually access it from the bottom, but it's easy enough to do ahead of time as well. If it's a little snug fitting in here, then just back your side panel screws off a little bit. I had to do that to get this in. exactly and set it on to the face of the bezel. So you'll see how that's gonna sit on there. Now we're gonna have to look from the other side to make sure. I'm gonna tighten the screws up a little bit. Hold that all nice and snug in place. Make sure it centers itself. And we'll look from underneath here. Make sure the monitor is sitting exactly in the bezel, squarely and lined up. So you can see, you want to just check where the weather stripping sits up against. You can leave it. You can, when you're playing these games, you're looking downward at an angle, so you make sure you can see down in the, and you don't see up the top. So just make sure you've got that where you want it, lined up nicely, resting on the bezel. So that'll tip forward from just the weight. I'm gonna position it on the table so it's actually resting on the top. It stays put. Okay, so now your brackets are on. We're just gonna pre-drill holes for the screws. Careful not to go all the way through. I'm gonna do just 2 at a time. Make sure it stays put. Again, I've got a low torque driver here that do not use a high torque driver and just drill, because you'll strip those screws right out of the wood. So double check my position. Looks good. The monitor can be moved up and down in the slots a little bit after and skewed a little bit later if you don't have it right the first time exactly. So then you can loosen these 4 Allen screws and shift it a little bit. But primarily we want the weight down on the weather stripping against the bezel so that it's nice and even and doesn't have higher pressure on one side than the other when you're doing this. That's why we're doing it flat and not on its side. All right, so keep in mind the Dell monitor makes it much heavier cabinet. So be careful with that. You can take that panel out too while you're working on it so it doesn't bounce around like it did for me. But there you can see monitor mounted bezel. You notice we don't have plexi come with our bezels. We prefer actually the non-glare screen, at least I do. If you wanted to put plexi on, you can get a piece of plexi at Home Depot or your building supply store, cut it to shape and screw it to the front of the bezels. Just make sure you avoid the monitor. So that's how we install our bezel and mount for the Dell 2007. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.